So, hello everybody, and welcome to Workforce Waves. So, today your hosts are myself and Melissa Rapska, and I'm really pleased to introduce a new voice to the podcast, Miss Bella. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Bella. I work with Melissa. I am a social media and outreach coordinator here at the Northwest Wisconsin Workforce Investment Board. And I'm a recent add-on, so I'm excited to be here.
We're really glad to have you on board and on the podcast team now officially. So, for all of our listeners out there, you will be hearing more from Bella in our next coming up episodes. So, but for today, it's going to be the Melissa show. And with that, we have a very special guest on to talk about a great topic, corporate mindfulness. So, mindfulness is a tool that really lends itself well to a lot of different workplaces, but it isn't necessarily something that people think about implementing or giving enough time and attention to really in the fast-paced world that we live in. Hustle culture is very much real, even though, in my opinion, it needs to really kind of go away. But with that said, mindfulness really is a great tool that it's an inexpensive strategy that you can utilize to really help your workforce and increase like employee well-being and productivity and a number of different ways that can really help overall with the workforce and just on yourself on an individual level. And we're going to be getting into more of that with our special guest. So Kimberly, welcome very much to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So before we dive into today's podcast episode, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and the organization you work for, Advancing Organizational Excellence?
Sure. So Advancing Organizational Excellence, we go by AOE, as you know, we love acronyms in this world. I'm president of the organization, and we are a consulting firm that does everything from association management to marketing consulting. I have a special niche and expertise in crisis communications, which actually will be a nice tie with our topic here today. Another hat that I wear that I think is important with our discussion today is I'm a yoga teacher. And so that's where the mindfulness part comes in, and we'll see how these two worlds intersect here in a moment.
I love it. So you already talked a little bit about like telling us that you're a yoga teacher, and I should be remiss in saying that I actually am one of Kimberly's students. I just graduated from her program, so I'm really happy to have two worlds collide here today on this special topic. But I just wanted to ask, in terms of like your yoga teaching and mindfulness, is there anything that you'd want to share initially about how you got interested in this topic?
So I got interested in corporate mindfulness because my two worlds collided. I do a lot of public speaking, a lot of training with executives related to crisis communications, PR, organizational management. And as I grew in my yoga journey as a yoga student and as a yoga teacher, I got very interested in meditation and mindfulness. I'm a pretty high-strung person. I'm a pretty type A person. And mindfulness has proven to bring me down a notch. But my world started to collide when I was out on the public speaking circuit, and people would hear just anecdotally that I was a yoga teacher, and people would start to ask questions about this mindfulness thing. Especially around 2016, 2017, I meant to look it up last night. Time Magazine actually referred to it as the year of mindfulness. And we started to see mindfulness pop up in the corporate setting. So it's always fascinating to me that, my business expertise, but then I'm often asked to come in and speak to teams about the mindfulness piece of all of it as well.
Which definitely lends itself when you're dealing with like crisis communication skills. So absolutely. Now on the show, I'm a big person about definitions, and especially when we're talking about a concept like mindfulness, a lot of people can come into that with some preconceived notions and connotations about what the word means.
Yep.
So in terms of our discussion today, how do you define mindfulness?
So mindful is really being dedicated or maybe more focused on the activity that you are doing. So, and I think if you look it up, you're probably going to find many other variations of the definition, but I think that's what I would want everybody to walk away with today is being really present in the activity or the thought that you are experiencing at that time. So how that plays obviously in the corporate sector is that we are being asked more and more in our business setting and then even in our personal lives to multitask. And so we're constantly multitasking. We're not present in our current activity, and it's creating a lot of anxiety for many of us. We think that multitasking is a good thing, and we even brag about what great multitaskers we are, but our brains are not actually wired to be able to do that. We can train our brains to multitask, but it's at a deficit and at a cost for something else. And there's been, many, many studies that actually validate that that's what we're seeing show up in the workplace. So back to definitions, sometimes meditation and mindfulness are interchanged. And, meditation is that process where you're actually sitting within yourself with your thoughts maybe for a moment, and we can talk more about that. But really think of mindfulness as being present in the activity that you are engaged in.
So then thinking about like a workplace setting, like what would be some examples of like how somebody could practice mindfulness when they're on the job?
So mindfulness in a workplace setting is our ability to really be focused and engaged in, for example, our meeting. I've seen a real shift in the last couple of years, but there was a time maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago where I would go to a meeting and people would actually be responding to emails within the meeting and doing 10 other things at once. We all honed that skill during the pandemic because we were on Zoom calls while we were also working and not being present. So being really present for the people that are around you, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, and to the activity that you're doing. And then when you're doing your work, whatever your work may be, actually being focused on it. Studies show that if you're able to maybe turn off the email or put your phone away and really be focused on what you're doing, you're going to have a better work product, number one, be more engaged in what you're doing, probably be happier and less anxious as well.
I know one of my coworkers, she always commends me when I always like with our group chat, I'll send it off before I start working on a project. I'm like, I'm closing out my email. There's no way I would be able to focus on like federal compliance type things if I'm constantly checking my email while I'm trying to write up my report. So it's so like being intentional with your time too and your focus, I feel like is really important.
Agreed. And that's something I think as leaders we need to emulate and practice and show too. And part of this also is building in time for thought, building in time for creativity, building in time for continuing education and learning. A study a couple of years ago showed that because we're always multitasking, we're not even good at brainstorming anymore like we used to be. So, all of these lost arts in terms of our brain and the science of our brains and how they work, we need to give them a chance to actually focus on the activity we're doing. It's also mental preparedness. So I share the example, a way of, if you are in a physical office and you're walking to a meeting, a conference room, taking a moment to collect yourself, being very mindful about, hey, I'm headed to this meeting. Maybe stop and look around, on the way to the conference room, peek outside the window, see what's happening out there. Take a moment to actually breathe, pause, take 60 seconds to trace your inhales and exhales will go a long way to actually bring you into the present of the activity you're doing. We can train our brains to multitask. And we've actually gotten really, really good at it. And interestingly enough, studies show that women are better at multitasking, but before all the women on the call celebrate, that actually means that we've trained our brains to be able to do this, and that's not necessarily a healthy thing. And before you get angry calls, men are good at it too. So, but our brain really can only handle so much at once. So in terms of decision-making ability, being able to be focused on one thing is really, really key. We learned this quite a bit related to the pandemic as well. We as a nation have a lot of decision fatigue right now too. So in terms of constantly making decisions. That's where the crisis communication piece came in for me, because so many were operating in a crisis. I'm sure your own organization at some level, whether you called it a crisis or not, different way of working. How do you serve your constituents and stakeholders? Constantly having to make decisions. If you're doing and making all these decisions while not giving your brain a rest because you're doing all these other things and inputs, it's really, really tough. So there's a whole science to the brain part of it too, which I find fascinating. But the important thing is, we can train our brains to multitask, and then they crave more input. So if you find yourself that when you're watching Netflix at night, if you have to be scrolling on your phone, that's a real symptom to you that you've trained your brain that you always have to be doing multiple things at once. And think back to the days where you actually just sat and watched a movie or watched a TV show, waited for the commercial break to go to the bathroom. I mean, those were the days of our childhood. So look at for some of those symptoms, because we're not really happy when we're surfing the web and surfing Facebook while we're trying to watch a show.
Something that I definitely thought about, like when we discussed this, like during like yoga teacher training in terms of like mindfulness, is like that dopamine hit. Like it just how that like multitasking really feeds off of it and the relationship between that. So it's just, I feel like what you provided were really good examples of that. And I feel like everybody is like, well, wait, how much am I really on my phone? Am I actually like watching the Netflix TV show that I'm streaming? So
yeah, I recognized in myself as a leader, before the pandemic, I would be hosting a meeting, and it was a virtual meeting, but I'd be on a conference call, or maybe we were actually using a video platform, and I myself was on my phone looking at things because I was bored at my own meeting. Okay. So that was a real wake-up call for me as I started to dive into this, that if I can't stay focused on the own meeting that I am hosting and people are giving time to, take it a scale back. Now, with all that said, so if we're used to being multitaskers and if we're used to being so distracted, what can you as a leader do, to create an environment? And it may be asking everyone to leave their phones aside or leave their laptops aside, to create engagement and look for ways to actually, change the brainwaves, if you will.
So last week I was at a conference, and probably this has been like the largest group of people I've been around that have been just so completely uncomfortable, was when one of the presenters who was presenting on stolen focus and stolen attention said, for the next 42 minutes, don't look at your phone.
Wow.
Like you could just sense everybody in the room just cringing at the idea of not being able to touch their device. So I guess one thing, just I know we talked about like some great examples, but really like the benefits piece. Like I try, especially if you're trying to pitch something like to your organization or to your supervisor, or trying, if you understand like the importance of this, but if you're trying to like almost sell it to somebody, like really what are the benefits when it comes down to like crunching, crunching numbers, but in terms of like thinking more of that like corporate mindfulness piece.
So when we're multitasking and we're not mindful about the activity that we're doing, our brains actually get sluggish, because they're being pulled in too many different directions. We're not making as good of decisions. We're not, as creative. We're not as diligent, and depending on what your work product is, but you're not going to hit 100%. You're probably going to hit 85% on things. And then there's the anxiety and the stress level of it too. And we know that we've got a lot of stress from in our kids right now that are showing up in school, all the way through to all the different generations. We've got 5 generations in the workforce for the first time right now. And this anxiety is presenting itself in different ways across the generation. So really key to look at this from a wellness standpoint for your organization, for your people.
So then, in terms of being like an employer or in a leadership position within an organization, like how can you encourage mindfulness within your workforce? Because we've talked on this podcast a lot about workplace culture, and I feel like mindfulness is really such an important piece to that, or it could be. But I'm just kind of curious, what your opinion would be about ways to really kind of like encourage that mindset.
So one of the first things that I would do, depending on your culture, is maybe even eliminate the word mindfulness. Or meditation. When we think of meditation, we think of yogis sitting on pillows with their arms out and breathing and chanting and their mind actually being clear. Same with mindfulness. It may conjure up different viewpoints and thoughts related to religion or this woo-woo yoga stuff, whatever. So look at what your culture is and approach it from a way of really just being more focused. And then again, talk about how can we actually make the most of our time together. We're all being asked to do more with less. So how can we be very respectful to the activity at hand when we gather, asking for input, asking for feedback related to that.
That's great. So before I close us out, I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if there wasn't anything that you were able to touch upon in terms of this topic or anything that you would want our listeners to know in terms of like the importance of this.
Well, depending on what excites you, I really encourage you to look into the topic a little bit more, especially related to the brain part of it. I'm a brain geek, and the fact that we can reprogram our brains, I think, is just amazing, and train them to be more singularly focused. So, a simple search online, and you're going to find a lot of content to help you with that part. And then just remind you to look for ways, this is not a big undertaking. We all know that to create a habit, starting small is good. So maybe putting your phone away while you're watching a show tonight, or being a little bit more focused. Our kids and our animals are usually good teachers of us on this kind of thing. I tell a story about walking my dog, and I would take him for walks on lunch, and he would actually stop and look at the trees while I was looking at my phone, trying to multitask, take the dog on a walk while on my phone. And he would just sit there until I'd put my phone away. I mean, people don't believe it, but it was true. So look around, find small moments. There's great tools out there too, in terms of bringing mindfulness into your day. Insight Timer is a great one. I am not a paid rep for them, but it is the tool that I use. It's a great app. And I actually just find each morning, a 3-minute meditation that walks me through, just kind of centering myself. It's a great thing to do.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Kimberly, for all the information that you've given us today about just some really good starting places in terms of exploring mindfulness. So with that said, if our listeners want to know more about AOE, because we also live in the world of acronyms here too, in the workforce development world, where would be some great places for them to go to check you guys out?
So if you go to AOE Team, so AOETEAM.com, you'll find a lot of content, including some webinars on corporate mindfulness. So if you go under our resources, I've got an entire half-an-hour training session that you could actually do with your team, with some multitasking exercises, etc. So encourage you to go ahead and grab it, use it, and then feel free to reach out to me if I can help in any way too.
Awesome, Kimberly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.